This presentation I'll cover the camera switch. So most of the functionality of these scripts are very similar in that you have to run into something to trigger an event, right? So if I look at this camera trigger, in this case there's two cameras that we need to define. And it's looking for a trigger enter, so basically we're attaching this script to any old object that we define as a trigger, and then what's going to happen is when we trigger, when we stumble into this trigger, it's going to switch from one camera, and then it'll switch back when we leave that trigger. That's the how this script is set up. And so I thought this would be a valuable script to include because it does get into multiple cameras, which can be kind of fun and valuable. I'm just going to do a real quick cleanup on my scene. I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'll call this street for now. And what I'll do is I'm going to grab all these cubes and I'm going to drag and drop those into my street object. So basically I have a parent object called street, and it contains all of these cubes. That way it simplifies my hierarchy. I know that I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time moving these around, at least at this point in the demonstration. And in the future I'll go over some more workflow issues here. But I want to focus on the camera switching, and right now I only have one camera inside my scene. This is the default camera, and I want to point out that it's coming with a tag of main camera. Now when I hit the play button, this was just the main default camera that was inside of our scene, and if we've been experimenting with cameras at all at this point, you may have discovered that under the game object create other, you can generate additional cameras. And so I'll call this, this will be my sky cam, or my bird cam. And so with that camera selected, it's giving me a little preview here of what my view is. And basically what I want to do is I want to back this up. I'll move it up in the air, and I'll just tilt it down, so I'll rotate it according to the x-axis, it looks like. There we go. And so I want to look at, maybe I'll move it over just a bit too. I'll move it over just a little bit. And the concept here is that when I start, I'm going to start off, my camera will be tracking my marble as it always has, and then when I encounter this trigger, it's going to switch to this aerial view, and then as my marble leaves the trigger, it'll switch back to my main camera. Okay? And so the idea is that I have a sky camera, I have my main camera, and for the sake of this demo, I'm going to delete the original trigger that I had and the destination from the teleport script, and I'll just create a new object. This time around I'll use a cube. I'll just look from the top down here and kind of move this over, make sure it's not floating way above so I can interact with it. I got to make sure it's a trigger. I want to make it a little bit bigger, so I'll scale the X and the Z up just a bit. And in fact, well, I'll leave this visible for now, but I'll move it down just a bit. Okay, so it's not so huge. I've set this as a trigger. I'm going to go to the camera switch script, and I'll just drag and drop directly into the inspector because I still have my cube selected. And you can see that when I've attached this script, I have to identify camera 1 and camera 2, and it's looking for a camera object here. So for camera 1, I want to use my main camera. This is the thing that's tracking the marble. And then for camera 2, I want to use my sky camera. So let me just take a look at this script and remind myself what it's doing. So we've defined these two first variables. Variable camera 1, we've dragged and dropped a camera onto that field. Same thing for 2. It's going to start off as camera 1 being the enabled camera. It's set to enable true. Camera 2 is disabled. Once we collide with our trigger, just like we did in the teleport script, we're looking for a tag called player. And the idea here is that we don't want any object that comes into contact with this trigger to be triggering the cameras back and forth, because once we have bad guys running around in our scene, they might come across this collider as well. And if they hit it, and if it's letting any old collision, any old object trigger the cameras back and forth, we're going to have a game that the cameras are just completely out of control and seemingly flip back and forth for no apparent reason. So what we're looking for is an object that is tagged with player, and when it collides with it, it's going to switch these back and forth. So on trigger enter, it enables camera 2. So once we enter the collider, Camera 2 is going to take over, and then once we exit the collider, so once we pass through the object, it's going to set Camera 1 back to true. Okay? So that's how this whole thing is functioning. I'm going to jump back into Unity. So I'll select my marble. Now remember, I've already tagged my marble as player, so I don't have to go through that process again. I'll hit the play button, and I should start off in my standard marble view. There I am. And now once I cross the collision, my camera switches, and then it immediately switches back out. Okay, so I'll hit the play button again. And so while I'm inside this collider, I'll slow it down. There we go. It triggers the camera 2 and then happens to spit me back out to camera 1. Now, in the case of, we could use this for maybe we've reached the destination of our level and we want to switch to a bird's eye camera of our marble, just to say, yay, we won, and present some information up on screen, have a little timeout, and then we can actually combine this with loading a level. But this kind of functionality I think could be useful. Or maybe you just want to control the scheme setup, or you want to force a camera change at some point to force users to look at a different scenario, or maybe you want to trigger some kind of a cutscene. These are the kinds of things that you can do with either loading levels or loading cameras, depending on how you want to utilize that. So that's a simple camera trigger. There's also ways, and if you just do a quick search online, you can map camera changes to key functionality as well. So just by typing number 1, 2, and 3, you might have 3 different camera setups, and depending on which number you push, you could trigger those cameras. So it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. In the next presentation, this will be the final presentation for these scripts that I've provided. In the next presentation, we'll talk about the boost script, or a basic power-up script. We'll do that in the next presentation.